All right, everybody. I am joined today by H.G. Parry, also known as Hannah. I read a book, and I'll get into that later, but I do want to say real quick it is a little bit of a fairyland type book, and usually it's not my thing, but I'll get into why I loved it and why I think you should read it in a little bit. First question, though, however, I like to ask every author, what is your supervillain origin story?
Oh, um, yeah, my villainy started young, apparently. So when I was little, apparently a writer was all I ever wanted to be. I was that child who was always reading and writing since before I can remember. I think my earliest memory is reading Jemima Puddle Duck by Beatrix Potter. I got far too much encouragement from the adults around me, so I was just always entering competitions and going to workshops and stuff like that. I wrote my first novel. I called it a novel. It was probably a long short story, like in high school, which was, I remember it was a dystopia about a band of plucky rebels trying to bring down the government who discovered halfway through the book their citadel was really a spaceship because I decided halfway through the book I wanted a space battle. So that was me when I was younger. Then I went to university, and somewhere in the line, I got into my head that writing wasn't a real job that people do. I decided I was going to be an academic and write about other people's books instead. So I did that for a number of years. Honestly, it was probably the best thing I could have done. I learned so much about language, about story. I just have nothing but good things to say about it. But while I was doing my doctorate, I shared an office with a brilliant writer named Keelan Hughes, who's a very successful literary fiction writer at the moment. But at the time, she was querying her first novel. And it just sort of reawakened the thought that this was something that people actually did, and maybe I could give it a go. So she was very generous, telling me how to go about querying literary agents, what the publishing process looked like, and everything I knew nothing about. So I got a few short stories published. Then I started querying the novel I had on and off, and that was basically it. I signed with my agent at the end of the year. Um, for a while, I did both writing and teaching, especially because it took me a few years to sell a book. But yeah, essentially, my 5-year-old self was right all along. This is what I've been doing for years, and yeah, I love it.
Oh, I love that answer. It actually makes a great segue. I'm going to actually skip to what's normally my third question because you've segued me very, very well. You said you had somebody that kind of showed you the ropes, the stuff that you weren't familiar with, things that maybe you didn't know you needed to know as an author. What
Yes.
advice would you give another author? Doesn't have to be writing advice, but an aspiring author, what are you going to tell them?
I mean, in terms of writing as opposed to getting published, it's kind of what everyone says, which is just read a lot, write a lot, and make sure you finish what you write. The last one's the least fun and probably, unfortunately, the most important because I could sit there writing like scenes where characters talk to each other and drink tea for ages, but you don't learn a lot about finishing something and about structure and about all that kind of thing doing that. So I guess what was helpful for me when I was starting out was just doing a lot of short stories because that's something where you can experiment a lot and you can try out different things without the kind of investment that comes with launching into a novel. So you can make a lot of mistakes and you can find out what works for you. You can test out things you read. So that was really helpful. Finishing short stories and then sending them away and seeing if I could get them published was really successful. In terms of getting published, honestly, just do it. Is I guess just like yeah, find out the way to go about it, but don't wait too long. Don't sell yourself short. If you query too early, you will learn a lot just from doing that. So go for it. I guess.
Exactly. All right. So then the other question I always like to ask before we get into the books for the people who, again, mainly for aspiring authors, but also for fans, what does a day in the life of H.G. Perry look like?
Mm. Yeah, I really wish I had a glamorous, beautifully structured workday answer for you. Actually, it's just very messy and chaotic. I have a flat in Wellington. I also spend quite a bit of time at my sister's house at Raumati Beach, so I'm one or the other place. Either way, I wake up, I take care of all the pets. Between us, we have two rabbits. It's my two rabbits. They've just turned 9 years old this week. Two rats. I've got three mice at the moment, and two cats, so they take a bit of looking after. Then I try to start the day with a cup of tea and a book to get my brain going. I make sure I start work about 10 o'clock or so. That's usually the best writing time. I don't write or edit in a structured way at all. If I'm drafting, I just tend to write down whatever I have in my brain. So sometimes that's scraps of dialogue, sometimes that's bits of scenery, sometimes that's kind of sketching out chapter openings. I leave gaps and I come back and fill it in later. I tend to rework things as I go. So I know some people, and I admire them a lot, will just do a zero draft and write all the way through and leave things to be fixed later. Whereas I've just found that doesn't work. If I write a scene and I know it needs fixing, I need to go back and fix it before I can move on. So sometimes I will spend a long time just rewriting scenes. So yeah, it's very much about, even if I have a plan, which increasingly I've had to because I've sold things before I've written the book. But even with a writing plan, it's still very much cobbling things together by feel. And I try to get as much as that done as possible in the morning. I have lunch and go out for a walk. Then I come back. I do whatever else I need to do. If I have any admin, I kind of leave that till the afternoon because it's away from that first rush of creative energy that you want to take advantage of. But sometimes I keep writing, especially if I'm on deadline. I mean, I try to take the evenings off and watch television and spend time with the people I love until but if there's a really pressing deadline, that can just go out the window as well. Yeah, sometimes it's at home. Sometimes I'll take my computer. I don't tend to go out to cafes, but I will go out to libraries. I will go out to places like, there's a lot of really good little museums in Wellington, and you can find places to kind of tuck yourself away and watch people, and that can be really helpful to try to just change the scenery. But yeah, that is basically it. It is just I sitting in front of a computer hoping that the book is going to materialize. And sometimes that's very productive. Sometimes you find you've been sitting there for an hour and you started out in a research rabbit hole, but now you've watched 5 YouTube videos about how to train a dog when you don't even have a dog. Um, but it's just sitting there until the book materializes on the screen, and I'm endlessly surprised every time I sit back and find that a book has actually materialized on the screen.
Well, you did have a little work in that. I do love the asking this question though too, because every author has a different answer, and I think that's kind of what I want to tell aspiring authors. There's morning writers, there's afternoon writers, there's evening writers, there's at home by myself, nobody bother me writers, there's at the coffee shop writers, or on the balcony writers. So I just love the fact that everybody's got their own thing, and none of them are wrong.
Yeah, yeah, that is, I mean, that is something you learn. I mean, it's like the drafting thing. I started out thinking, yeah, I'd read advice saying to get a draft finished, you just sit there and you finish it and don't go back and play with anything or reread over what you've seen, because then you'll just be doing that endlessly. But like I say, I just found that that doesn't work. I have to go back and fiddle with it. And when the draft is complete, it means that I spend slightly less time editing. So yeah, there is no right or wrong. You have to just find what works for you.
Exactly. So I'm going to show this real quick because I believe I read this before it came out as an ebook, so I don't have the physical copy in front of me. So wanted to talk to you about this little book called A Far Better Thing. I absolutely adored this one. I am always looking because I don't usually get into them. I usually don't get into the fairy realm type books. There's a few that I've enjoyed, but you did something very different with yours in a way. And by that, what I mean is almost all fairy realm books these days, not all of them, but most of them, there's either a romance, it's a fairy romance, or it's a fairy court, political intrigue, or both. And you managed to write a book where, do we meet the fairy court? Some, yes, but they're not the main thing. And is there romance in it? I would say there's a type of romance, but I feel this book is much more about relationships and more of a love than that what we would consider the romance. Because let's face it, romance in most books is infatuation. And the fact that you wrote that while also writing a book with such prose that I feel like it read to me like a classic of literature, which you don't see too much in these. What was your
Thank
what was your big inspiration for the story?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, it's supposed to be basically I it's a retelling of A Tale of Two Cities. Basically, I don't know if Tor if Tor mentioned that when they send it to you, but that is essentially what it is. So I think, yeah, and you say I didn't really approach it as a fairy book, even though it is a fairy book. I approached it first as a retelling of A Tale of Two Cities. And what, yeah, so it's a book I've been trying to write for a very long time, really. Basically, I read A Tale of Two Cities about, by Charles Dickens, obviously, about 10 years ago or so. I read it because obviously that book is about London and Paris, and I'd just been to London and Paris for the first time, so that was very alive in my head, and I loved it very much. And for the people who haven't read it, the relevant point of it for this book was that there's two characters in that book. One is Sydney Carton, who my version of him's the main character in this book, who's a very he's a drunk, dissolute lawyer who with a lot of self-loathing. And there's another character called Charles Darnay who's also in the book, and he is a mysterious character at the start. Turns out to be a French aristocrat in exile, and they look absolutely identical for reasons. An explanation is not given in the book, but it becomes very important later in the book. Not to spoil that. So I was having a conversation with someone about this book. It's one of those things I remember very clearly. I was on the waterfront. It was summer. It was a lovely day. And I just remember talking about that book and saying, okay, but what if the reason why Darnay and Carton are similar in that book is because Darnay is Sydney's fairy changeling? And that was basically, I said that and was like, okay, I really want to write this because it sounds like a lot of fun, but it also sounds like an enormous challenge, which I obviously was not really. That's why it took me 10 years. I wasn't really up to it 10 years ago. But yeah, there was something. I mean, basically, when it came to that book, Tale of Two Cities, the question of why, what if they looked similar? What if they were fairy changelings? That was a great hook, but it was kind of a what if? Why does that matter? So I went back and read through that book and had a look at it. And two things really struck me about that book. First of all, was that in that book, the Sydney Carton in that book, from a character point of view, the way he looks at Charles Darnay in that book, he doesn't just look at him as this is someone who happens to look like me. He explicitly looks at him as someone who is a better version of himself that he's kind of jealous of and has a love-hate relationship with. He describes him as someone that shows who he's fallen away from and who he might have been. So that was something to tease out, that like, what if that was actually, what was it was literally the case? How would you deal with the idea that someone has not only stolen your life, but they've made a better job of it than you? So what would that feel like? So that was really interesting to me. The other thing that really struck me about that book was that it's very much a book about what we'd probably call intergenerational trauma now. So everyone in that book is struggling under the weight of past wrongs, both on a societal level. So I mean, that's kind of how the French Revolution is portrayed in that book. The idea that the lower classes have been wronged by the aristocrats for all these years, and they're striking out in revenge, and things are going very dark and bloodthirsty because of it. And also on a personal level, so many of those characters in that book are having to choose, have characters who have their family, terrible wrongs have been done to their families. They've inherited these pasts and they're having to respond to it. It's a book that's very much about echoes and shadows and very concerned about whether violence always begets violence or whether it's possible to build something better out of that. And I felt like that also lent itself very well to changeling mythology. The idea that your childhood has literally been stolen away, that it's a wrong that's been done to you before you can even remember it, and that's shaped your life since then. So how are you going to respond to that? What does that mean for you? So those were things I very much wanted to write about, and they were things that very much felt like they were going to lend themselves to that fairy book setting, that they were things that were already kind of latent in fairy mythology. So that was kind of the angle I took from it. It was like, I want to tell this story from a slightly different angle, and I want to use the fairy mythology to kind of bring out what's already there and just explore some really interesting, knotty things.
I think the most impressive thing you did with your main character too is what I'm going to call triple thetic. You have made a character that in some ways is pathetic. In some ways, though, you've also written him very sympathetic, and yet he's also very, to an extent, empathetic. For instance, like he wants to hate his changeling, but he can't quite bring himself to do it because the guy's a nice guy and isn't doing anything to deserve it. So he's
Mm.
got that heart of gold that's just drowning in alcohol most of the time, but it's
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
It's hard to get that. I mean, you've made a character, like I said, that you could have gone one direction too far in either direction and he wouldn't be who he was. And I've loved the fact that you combined them in what I thought was a relatively seamless way. We see parts of him, but we never ever feel like he's doing anything that is really out of his character.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, and that was such a hard balance to get right. Because yeah, how I saw him was someone who actually cares incredibly deeply, and that's the problem. He cares very deeply about things. He's had a lot of bad things happen to him, and because of that, he's trying not to feel those things. He's trying not to hope because he's been told all his life that, or learned all his life that there is nothing to hope for. So he's trying to numb that with with things like alcohol. He is trying to cloak it in cynicism. He's trying to do all that kind of thing, and that is very hard. Like it was a very difficult. I was very aware when I was writing it that I'm like, this could be a really depressing headspace to ask readers to be in for quite a long book. So it's very much trying to find that balance of seeing that, first of all, seeing that, yeah, I'm glad you said, seeing that he is an empathetic person, that he does care about things. Trying to keep that level of humor and lightness to it, even though it's quite dark humor and lightness to it, so that it's not just a depressing headspace to be in. And yeah, hopefully keep planting those seeds early on that, yeah, that there's better things that he's going to grow to. Yeah.
True, true. I do have to say though, he's empathetic despite how mean you are to him because you did him kind of dirty. He's
Yeah.
got without touching on any spoilers, he's got a rough start to life in this book.
Yes. Yes,
We
I
we don't
know.
start there, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, no, he's one of those characters that if he got to meet you in real life, he would have some grudges to to work through.
But the fact that you gave him even under all that though, he wants like you said he wants to be cynical, but I think he also still wants to hold on to that sliver of hope. He hasn't quite can't quite bring himself to let go of that.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. And that's very much what I was interested in that book with in terms of it's like, I say I was interested in that initial relationship between the Dick and Sydney and Darnay and the relationship that he has with other characters is that yeah, he wants to just say, I'm down here in the gutter, you're up there, I can't stand you because, you've got all this stuff and I don't have. But at the same time, he has enough self-awareness to realize that first and foremost, the people that he wants to hate, he doesn't hate them. He envies them, but he also envies them because he knows that he's capable of doing that. He doesn't want to believe he's capable of bettering himself. He wants to believe that he's has no choices, that he's given up, especially, yeah, by being a fairy servant. He wants to believe, in some sense, that he has no choices, that he's just given everything up. But he has the self awareness to know he does have choices. He can choose to act, he can choose to make himself better, and he wants to. There isn't quite, he doesn't actually have that depth of cynicism to be like, all right, this is all there is. He believes there's better in the world, and that's a very tormenting thing. That's something that troubles him a lot, but it's also something that, yeah, ultimately, hopefully, is going to save him.
Yeah, I feel like this is a character who is surrounded by people who are more than willing to use him. And
Mm,
he always has that little bit of a chip on his shoulder, like he doesn't want to be used, but he also has given up to the point where he just kind of, let's face it, he allows it to a lot because he thinks, well, I don't have a choice in the matter anyhow, so might as well
yeah,
just do it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and in some cases that works. I mean, it depends. Obviously, with when it comes to the fairies using him, they're using him to do truly reprehensible things, and that's something that he needs to learn to, that he's trying to accept and trying not to fight back against. But when he ends up meeting characters later who, like, he knows are trying, who have their own aims. The friends he makes later on have their own aims. To some extent, he feels like he's being used by them, but in some level, he also aligns with what they're trying to do, and them trying to use him is something that is giving him an excuse to move and do his own things as well. Yeah.
I love too the fact that you just said this was a retelling. You've also
Mm.
managed to put it not just by changing the trappings and the background as a fantasy story, but I feel like you really put your own stamp on it. I think somebody could read both books side by side and you'll see like, okay, I can see the hints of there, but I also think a far better thing completely stands on its own.
Oh, thank you. That was the idea. Yeah, I really wanted, in terms of it being a retelling, on one level, it's a very close retelling because I really wanted it to be not just I'm taking a couple of these elements and writing an entirely new story. On one level, I wanted to make it so that if you read the original, obviously the original Tale of Two Cities, it's third person. It obviously does not have fairies in it. Sydney Carton is in it, but he's off. He's quite a mysterious character. He's off screen for large stretches of off page for long stretches of time, and you don't know what he's getting up to. So I very much wanted to be Tale of Two Cities is the version that Dickens is telling, the modern day, the real world version. But for the fairy version to be able to work like a shadow version of it, like you can overlay them and they work. But on the other hand, obviously, I did want to make sure that it was its own story, and because there are quite a lot of sections in the Tale of Two Cities where that the original Sydney Carton is off page. I wanted it to be, and part of that was what was the doing the layering up the many drafts was like. The first version I wrote was very close, and so it was a matter of to the original. So it was a matter of coming back and being like, okay, you've got this whole section where nothing's happening. We can get some new characters in here. So we can do things like the Goblin Market and the libraries with the shadows and claws and that kind of thing. And we can let that happen and let that kind of, yeah, build its own story at the same time. So, yeah, hopefully, if you have read Tale of Two Cities, you can see, they will blend together. And if you haven't read Tale of Two Cities, it can just be read on its own and work as a book in its own right.
So let me ask you a question. I'm guessing the answer is no, but I could be wrong. I feel like you made this book enough of your own story that you could return to this world. Have you thought about it at all?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I mean, when I without spoiling the ending, I in some ways, yeah, I'm trying to work out a phrase without seeing the end. I would really like to come back and find out what happens after the book ends, because the last act of the character of Sydney in this book is very much something that I wanted to be like it's the end of his story. I don't think that's a spoiler if you've read Tale of Two Cities, but it's the end of his story. But he sent other people on. It's very much the sort of spark of a revolution that
Mm-hmm.
could happen, and I'd be very interested in following up with that and finding out what's happening in the fairy realm, because I did very much want it to be a book that this is one character's path through and a very personal journey through something. But I wanted to make it clear that off in the sidelines there were very big global shifts happening. Obviously, our world version of that is the French Revolution, so which is a huge thing, and it's taking place entirely apart from what the main characters in the book are trying to do. There's also huge shifts going on in the fairy realm, but I wanted to keep those very mysterious and very the Sydney in the book. He is not a major player in the realm. He is someone that they've overlooked. He is very much he's a changeling, a human child that's been snatched and replaced. They don't look at him at all, so he does not have an in-depth understanding of what all the politics of the fairy realm are. But those are all happening as well, and there are great shifts taking place there. So and obviously the people he meets, they all have their own sort of revolutionary goals as well. So yeah, I'd very much like to come back and have a look at what else is happening in that world.
Perfect. And I want to break the fourth wall for a second. For all of you aspiring authors out there, I want you to pay very close attention to something that she just said, because I feel like this is something you need to hear. She wants to revisit this so she can see what happened. She doesn't know what happened yet. Write the book you want to read, and then hopefully other people will love it. You don't have to write the book that is popular in the genre right at this moment. So
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, and that is the only, I mean, okay, I say this because I know some people do manage to write books. For me anyway, that's the only way I'm ever going to finish a book is if I really want to know what's happening. If I know how it's going to end, or I have it all plotted out, then there's no point me writing it. I already know it. It's always got to come from something that you want to explore and something you want to find out.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah, no, I know a couple authors though that will not write until they know how it's going to end because they need to know where they're going. Every author is different. Let's just face it. All right.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say about the book? Because again, like much like you, I'm trying to avoid any spoilers for people that haven't read Tale of Two Cities before. Is there anything that you would want to say about it though? Any just like, a pitch or something like that, or just something that was really interesting to you when you wrote this book?
Oh, I mean, I guess, yeah, not that I can, not that I haven't can think of off the top of my head that I haven't already said. It's obviously it's a book that's very important to me because I've been trying to write it for 10 years and kind of finally got to it, I guess. So it's a character that I've lived with for 10 years on and off. It's a book that it covered a lot of things that I was very interested in exploring. Both sort of personal things like how you deal with grief, how you deal with with feeling like you've started life out on the wrong foot, all that kind of thing. But also just very much the historical side of things is I'm very interested in things like the French Revolution, or even in this case, I guess if you're writing history of the fairy realm, that kind of mirrors that. I'm very interested in the idea of being caught in moments of history where things are shifting and times are changing. So and codes are changing, eras are changing. So, and what it's like to be trapped in those kind of moments or live through those kind of moments, what choices you get faced with, what you're going to do when you're confronted with these kind of life altering things. So, yeah, I say it was a book I really loved writing and exploring because there was a lot going on in it that I really enjoyed teasing out. And yeah, just a lot of big questions that when I started, I feel like, without saying too much, I feel like I've got a lot more relevant over the 10 years that I've been writing. I feel like we're living through a very interesting historical moment at the moment. And so some of those questions that the French Revolution and things like that naturally spring up just became more and more pressing as I went on.
One question before I get to my final four then. What are you, if anything, working on right now, or what might you have coming out next?
So right now I'm doing I hope final edits on a book that I've got coming out next year. I'm not sure how much I can say about it because it's been floating around online and I've talked about it, but we haven't really officially announced it yet. But it's an Arthurian book basically that takes place half in the Arthurian world and half in World War II era Wales. It's about a young woman who is sent out to a mysterious library in Wales during the height of the Blitz. And in the meantime, while all this World War, in the midst of World War II, everyone starts dreaming about King Arthur, and she starts dreaming about Nimue rather than Arthur. So, and it's kind of a response to T.H. White's Once and Future King. It's a book that I've just, really, again, it's one that's dealing with a lot of stuff that I've really enjoyed writing, and that's hopefully going to be out next year.
So you love your time periods with no flushing toilets. I see how we're going here. All
Yeah,
right.
absolutely. Yeah, what's the point of a fantasy with a flushing toilet?
Exactly. All right. So a couple of questions I always ask everybody. One, what are you reading?
Oh, good question. So I'm halfway through a book by Antonia Hodgson at the moment. Which this one's actually a historical crime novel that takes called The Devil in the Marshalsea. It takes place in the Marshalsea debtors prison in the 1720s. But she also has which is how I got onto her. She also has a book, epic fantasy out called The Raven Scholar, which I'm really enjoying the book I'm reading by her now. I'm really looking forward to reading that one. I have a lot of arcs waiting to be read, but a couple that are coming out soon that I really enjoyed is the first is a book called Higher Magic by Courtney Floyd, which is a magic academia book, but it is a magic academia book that is very, very relatable for anyone who's ever done postgraduate studies. It is about sort of inner workings of the university. The magic system is based on literary analysis. It's very clever. It's a lot about sort of equity issues in academia. It's so much fun. And so timely. I really loved it. And the other is a book called Kill the Beast by Sarah Swift, which is just a glorious, yeah, just a really glorious old fashioned adventure. It's got a flawed but awesome warrior and heroine. It's got a charming aristocrat with a secret. It's got a very good dog. I read that really fast. I really loved it. And both of those books are out in October. So, yeah, I really recommend both of them.
Nice, nice. I did read The Raven Scholar. I will not spoil it for you. Is there a hobby, skill, accomplishment that you wish more people knew so you could talk about something besides writing once in a while?
Oh, I mean, I really I love traveling. I specifically love traveling to write sort of classic writers' houses. So I've been to Dickens' house, I've been to Keats' house, I've been to the Brontes. So I love doing that and talking about that. But honestly, what people usually come up and talk to me about at events, which I love, is they just come up and show me pictures of their pet rabbits because I wrote a book called The Magician's Daughter a few years ago, which had a rabbit as a main character. I volunteer with rabbits kind of at an animal shelter. I have two of my own at home. Yeah, kind of rabbits, but also kind of mice, rats, small pets. So I'm hugely into sort of animal welfare in that regard and educating people about how to take care of little things like that. I think people know that about me because I post pictures about it on Instagram a lot. So yeah, I always love it when people come up and show me pictures of their rabbits and talk about them. I tell far too many stories about mice. So yeah, basically, yeah, travel and small pets is basically what I do when I'm not writing.
All right.
Yeah.
Then the last thing I want to ask, and you're the first Kiwi I've interviewed. I think I said that correctly. Uh,
Yep.
so I don't know any of the places out by your area, but I always love to give a shout out to a brick and mortar bookstore. Is there one in your area or one that you just want to say, stop here, buy the book?
Yes, definitely. We're down to one independent bookstore in Wellington City at the moment. We just had one go out of business, which is terrible. So I will shout out to them first, which is Unity Books in Wellington. They're amazing. There's one in Wellington and one in Auckland. But I also really want to shout out to a bookshop called Schrodinger's Books, which is in Petone, which I realize does not mean a lot to anyone outside of Wellington. Petone is just slightly outside of Wellington. It's on the coast. So when this book, A Far Better Thing, comes to New Zealand, which it won't until I think late October, but it will be here. So I'm doing an event with Schrodinger's Books out there, and they're a fantastic little bookstore. They do so many community events. The owners are really lovely. It's small, but it somehow manages to have everything that you want. And it's just one of those bookshops where you step into it. It has that kind of magical bookshop feeling, like you've entered into another world. So that's a really great bookshop.
Exactly. I feel like I'm much like you. Whenever I travel, I have to stop at a local bookstore, whether I need anything or not. So now, if I ever visit New Zealand, I've got suggestions. So perfect.
Yeah,
All right. I think
definitely.
that is it. I appreciate you taking out of your time from tomorrow, as we mentioned, because you're a whole day
Yeah.
ahead of me. And again, love the book. It is everything that I wanted in, I think, a fairy type book that I hadn't found yet because I'm not really into the over the top romance or the, super intriguing. I like political intrigue, but I don't like it to be the whole thing. And I think you found like the perfect mixture, not just of your characters, but of the overall story as well. If you haven't picked this book up yet, this book is already out. Definitely go get it. I'm excited to see what else you have to write, what else is coming down the pipe, and maybe when you can talk more about it. And no, I appreciate you taking out your time, and I wish you all the success.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for reading it and getting in touch. That was fantastic.